Welcome to Hear From Where, a podcast about the journeys that shape us. I'm your host, Chef Andrew Garrett, and each week I'll sit down with incredible individuals who've carved their own paths in health, nutrition, entrepreneurship, sports, and beyond. This is where we dive deep into the stories of determination, resilience, and passion, the moments that brought them here, from where they started. Whether you're looking for inspiration, a spark to start your own journey, or just love hearing amazing stories, then you're in the right place. So grab your favorite drink, settle in, and let's explore what it really takes to follow your dreams. Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Hear From Where. I am your host, Chef Andrew Garrett. Today, I am joined by a good friend and employer, Caleb Viano, the owner-operator of Wilderness Mule Outfitting out of the Frank Church Wilderness of Idaho. I have been working with Caleb for 4 years now, 4 full seasons, I believe, and I have gotten to know him. He's a great leader. He's a fantastic guide. This dude knows animals better than most people will ever scratch the tip of. And so I'm excited to dive into this conversation. I've really been waiting to have this conversation because I wanted to like make sure I was dialed in on my end and knew exactly what I was getting myself into. Caleb, thank you so much. I'm really excited to dive into this. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Andrew. And I really appreciate the kind words. I've never done one of these before. This is my first time, so bear with me as I stutter my way through this. Because
that's great.
I believe that there are there's a lot of meaning and intention and in words. So I'm going to try to slow myself down. I have a tendency to start just jabbering away. Being born in the Northeast, I can speak very fast, and I know that it's hard for everyone to follow. So bear with me here as I do this for the first time. But thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great thing because most of my listeners, I believe, are on the West Coast. So, we do things a little bit slower out here. That's very fair. So you were born and raised in the Northeast, but you work now in Idaho. So where did you grow up in the Northeast, and what got you started on this journey of outfitting in the wilderness?
Yeah, so I was born in New Hampshire. I grew up in the Lakes region of New Hampshire, which is kind of center of the state. It's where most of my family is from and still remains. As a young man, my parents split, and I split with them, basically. My mom moved down to seacoast New Hampshire and into southern tip of Maine. We don't really call it Maine because if anyone knows Maine doesn't really become Maine until you get halfway up the state. The southern tip is more of a melting pot, if you will, of lots of different places. So, my mom lives on the Piscataqua River, just across the river from Portsmouth, New Hampshire. And I moved down there in the early life. I guess it would have been like the 4th grade with her. Bounced around, went to a lot of different schools. I ended up going to 7 different grade schools before I graduated from a very unique school up in Kennebunk, Maine, which was called the New School. And I suppose they called it that because it was a new idea. We didn't have charter school legislation at the time, and the idea of a student-governed school was very new. I guess it's still new in some ways, but the gist of it was we hired the teachers, made the rules, and really took control of our education and our lives, and found the true meaning of responsibility at a pretty early age. So, that was kind of the nutshell of my childhood existence. Now, I will tell you, as much as I really enjoyed school, I was a student that never struggled with schools. I always was actually pretty gifted, as humbly as I can say that. I don't ever want to have anything but humble because I am a humble person. but I enjoyed it. I used to show up early with a tie on and help the teacher out. I got, teased for that quite a bit. And I also struggled to make many friendships during school with kids my age and peers. Most of my friendships were with older men who kind of took me in and shared their wisdom with me through the outdoors. When I was in the 8th grade, I fell pretty ill. And a side effect of that was, at the time, I had been really getting into fishing. I don't know why exactly, come to find out now years later and understanding more of my heritage and the immigrants who came here, I think that it's all starting to make a little bit more sense. But at the time, it wasn't fishing in the outdoors, hunting, especially. None of that stuff was really a part of my family life. It was just something that I felt drawn to as a kid. And so not having any real mentors in that space, I did a lot of reading. I used to love to read. I still love to read, but I did a lot of reading. I became really infatuated with it. And I think it all really stemmed from my love for the outdoors. I was always enamored. My mom even says that about me as a kid, that I could just light up when I would see the outdoors and would see nature and wildlife. And so, started with an addiction to fishing. Before I fell ill, I was really into bass fishing. And so I actually used to hand carve plaster of Paris molds, had a little microwave down in my mom's basement where I would gather up all the used soft plastics that I could find at the local pond, and I'd melt them down and remold them into my own creations that I was able to use and go fish with. I got sick, and my mom bought me a fly tying kit. And so I'd never fly fished before. Honestly, I didn't even know what it was, but I really wasn't able to do a whole lot for about 6-7 months. They had to pull me out of school. I had to do my schoolwork at home, which I guess made me realize some then, but more so now, of how little the day-to-day stuff was important in school, because I could get my schoolwork done in about an hour. And I had plenty of free time, but I had a really high fever, and so I couldn't really do much. But I started tying flies. And so I tied flies and got really infatuated with that because I like to make things. I'm a maker. I've always been that way. I was a kid. Even some of my earliest memories were taking apart radios to figure out how they worked. My dad and most of both sides of my family are carpenters, and so I've always been a maker of some way, shape, or form, a craftsman, if you will. And so I got really into the fly fishing. As soon as I got better, I got to go finally use all these lures that I had created for months and just ate it up. I mean, honestly, one of the years in high school, I remember I kept track. I had about over 250 days that I fished. And it might not have been all day, but being as I went to an open campus format of school, I'd skip off for lunch and go fish. I'd fish before school. I built a number of boats when I was growing up. My senior project actually was hand building a mahogany drift boat. But before that, I built a flat skiff, and I'd go launch my skiff in the river in our estuaries around my mom's house at 4:00 in the morning and go fish for a couple hours before school or before work. It's really what I did. Instead of having friends, I adventured a lot and I worked a lot. Growing up fairly poor, I really felt the need and the desire to provide. And, whether that was bringing home my catch for the day to put food in the freezer, or working 4 or 5 jobs congruently during the summertime in order to pay for my hobbies, I figured out at an early age that the more I worked, while I didn't have bills like a mortgage, the more fun things I could own that, quite frankly, I just saw others in my family not having that ability. So I was on track to graduate a year early. I had decided, maybe sophomore year of high school, that Montana was where I was going to apply. I probably shot a little bit short of the stars there, when reality, I knew that I didn't really want to go to college, but I was surrounded, as being a product of the 90s. I was born in 1990, for, I guess, a little bit of reference there. I was given that common speech about success means college degree. My mom was one of the first, it might have been the only one in her family to have attended college. My father dropped out of high school sophomore year because they stopped letting him smoke in school. I knew that education was the only way we were going to get out of poverty. And I watched my mom climb that ladder as I was in grade school and in school, and she became very successful. And so, I knew that I needed to keep learning, and I love to learn, but I also like to freak out the squares. And I guess if for that reference doesn't really hit with some people, my dad and his brothers were really a part of some very cool motorcycle culture. So I grew up around a lot of that, and I got a lot of influence from, I guess, early Hells Angels type of crowd. People, I think, misunderstand biker culture in a lot of ways. It's changed in a lot of ways. And it's, especially for your West Coast listeners, it's very different there than it was where I grew up. Where I grew up, we had a lot of small local clubs whom my uncles were a part of. And it was really just their ability to be free thinkers, to do something that made them feel free. I think that they, in a lot of ways, were modern day saddle tramps. That their motorcycles were their outlet to see the back roads of the world, to take life a little slower, to embark upon adventure. That's something that has always really resonated with me, is that adventure word. And so, through the combination of watching Lonesome Dove far too many times and wearing out at VHS tape as a kid, ever since I was like maybe 4 or younger, that was just my favorite movie. I learned that Montana was the promised land. And so without anything else, I decided that I was only applying to colleges in Montana. And as much as I used college as an excuse, I also used the excuse that I was going to become a fishing guide. And so that's what I did. I was on track to graduate a year early. Unfortunately, my very best friend at the time, got a little bit more inebriated than he should have, wrecked his car, and passed away. And being in a school that was as small as mine was, now mind you, I graduated with a class of 6. There were 32 kids in my school in total. And so I really had a hard time readjusting to a school without my best friend. And especially considering how few of friends I actually had my age. It was really difficult. So basically my senior year, I didn't have to take any classes. I'd already done that. I think I took like maybe one class the first half of the year, but I primarily just I worked, and I worked on that drift boat. That was my senior project. And so it was good for me in a lot of ways because it prepared me to make this move. I also got to have a lot of time to focus on being a kid a little bit. It's something I've realized later in life that my parents split when I was very young, and I became the man of the household, and I kind of left my inner child stashed in a fort in the woods. So,
I think that this is something that it's something that you and I really connect with, and I hadn't really connected the dots until you just said it now, is myself being a child of divorce and growing up in a single mother household from a very early age. I had a ton of older male mentors in my life, and I always worked because I needed to have a job. And like yourself, like paying for my own hobby is like watching my mom work 12, 14-hour shifts so that I could have, a new baseball bat was different if I worked and bought myself my own stuff. When all these other kids, my peers are getting all their stuff, they just didn't have to do any of that. And I didn't get to go have the fun, but I spent a ton of time on reservoirs fishing and just hiking around the woods in the back of our house. Like, with that older male mentorship in your life, was that something that you still reach for now, like as far as finding mentors, or is it something that really helped you develop an early maturity so that you could move forward as quickly as you have?
I'd say both. I still would say that the majority of my friends, maybe it's not majority. I shouldn't put my foot in my mouth that quickly. I still have a lot of older male friends, a lot of older friends in general, whether it be male or female, but particularly a lot of older, wiser men that I look up to for guidance. That being said, I remember maybe I was 13 or 14 years old. I had an older gentleman named Alan. Oh boy, I think his last name was Lundberg, but I'm not going to misspeak. Awesome old guy. He was really a gem. He used to drive well out of his way to come pick me up and take me fishing. It was one of those things that, again, I didn't really understand it at the time, but I did have a little bit of understanding in that. One day I remember asking him, Alan, why do you want to go fishing with me? I'm just a kid. Why do you must have other friends to go fishing with, why drive 3 hours out of your way to turn around and drive all the way back up to take this kid fishing? I didn't feel like I deserved it. And he told me something that really stuck with me. He said, as I've gotten older, I've watched most of my friends perish and leave this world. And I realized that the only way I'll have friends for the rest of my life is if I start making friends with younger people. And God bless his soul, for that. That was a lesson that I try to implement more today and work with the employees, with my friends. Something I passed along to other people that I think have heard it the right way, that it's so easy for us to get stuck in something, to get stuck in a certain mindset, especially strong men with a sense of duty. We tend to just drive forward with our hands over our eyes and continue doing what's worked for us, and sometimes become a little hardened towards the world. And I think at the time, I didn't really understand that fully, but I did believe it to be true. And it's something that I've made a lot of effort in the last just recent years of my life of trying to embrace the younger generations as I employ them, to treat them like not only my employees but my friends, to listen to the youth, to not think that I know more, and just remember that I know nothing. I mean, that's a beauty, I think, of being in my 30s now, is I've truly embraced that I know nothing. And while I appreciate people who remind me that I do know a few things, it really serves me to remember that, whether it's a conversation with a 7-year-old on an airplane, or, speaking to a teenager about his aspirations to become a guide. There's so much wisdom that these old men have bestowed upon me that I'm so grateful for to this day. And it's certainly guided me and continues to guide me. But yeah, to answer your question without taking an hour to do so, I have a lot of mixture and new, and I'm really striving to keep that balance. So that way someday when I'm old, I will still have friends.
I love that. And I have never once considered that, but it makes so much sense. And what a cool mindset to hold on to, right? And then to be able to apply what you're speaking to, of not only continuing to learn. It's one of the things I really enjoy about working with you, is that you are always willing to learn something new, and you're constantly like challenging the broader scope of things. There's a specific way to do things, but okay, does that work? Not really. Okay, let's move on. But you constantly solve problems in a really solution-based way. And I love that, because I am a very solution-based person. But again, we could get lost in this whole, we could go down a whole rabbit hole of this philosophy for an hour, easy. So you've graduated high school.
Let me just throw one more thing in there, which I think it's important for our listeners to understand as far as the basis of our relationship. I think something that you've mentioned before to me that really resonated with me, because I did the same thing, is that we both started cooking at a young age. We both started cooking for our family at a young age. And I think that that's really, not something that always comes to mind when people ask me where I come from and what I do, but I worked in a lot of restaurants. That was part of my childhood, some of my earliest jobs. And I fell in love with food, not just because I loved eating, but because I loved feeding people. And there's something really special there that you totally understand. And it's one of the reasons that you and I have become such great friends, but also work so well together, is that piece of my childhood, as much as the outdoors thing. Because mind you, I guess to flashback there, I did start hunting at an early age too. Before we get too far ahead, just to spill that in there, because I think people will be like, oh, you like fishing, where'd the hunting come in?
Yeah.
I started hunting at 11. I started hunting at 9. At 9 years old, I worked for my father for an entire summer to save up. Well, I didn't save up anything. He gave me $100 at the end of the summer and said, you can go buy what you'd like with it. And I decided that I wanted to go buy a shotgun in order to go hunting, because I was allowed to turkey hunt at 9. And I think that freaked my mom out a bit, but I did. I went to our local used gun store, which I don't even think people know what that looks like anymore at the time.
Yeah.
And maybe a bit of it was dwarfed with the fact that you're a kid, everything looks bigger, but it was an enormous multi-story building with thousands of used firearms. And, beautiful, live free or die in a Hampshire way, no tax. You could go up there and with a tag written on it was the price you paid. And I found a single shot, Eastern European, I believe it was a Russian made 20 gauge break open shotgun for $90. And so I thought, I've done it. I can go hunting. So I bought that, and I got a couple rounds of turkey loads, and I went home and prepared to start my hunting career. It did start off with me flattening my ass in the front yard, trying to realize what a turkey load did to a 9-year-old kid that didn't weigh 100 pounds soaking wet. But that was kind of the birth of that. Flash forward a little bit. At 11, I decided, turkey hunting's not really for me. I want to go hunt deer. And so again, my dad, God bless his soul, he was not a hunter. He didn't know anything about hunting. And so same thing, worked a summer, got $150. I went and got to choose again. This time I chose an old Marlin 336 lever action 30-30. Much wiser investment, turns out. That one's appreciated quite well, and I've kept it in really good shape. I guess before I skip along too much, my dad taught me some really valuable lessons. While I haven't always been the closest to my father in life, due to a number of reasons, he did teach me how to be a good man, and he taught me attention to detail. He taught me that, if something's worth doing, it's worth doing the right way. And he taught me, a lot of things, but that's one that's worth noting there, because it's something that's always stuck with me. I oiled that gun every day when I came home from the rain and out there chasing deer with it. The first year we went hunting, we hunted from September to January, and I did not see a deer. Okay. And we went a lot. Now, totally because my dad didn't know what he was doing. It wasn't because there was a lack of deer in New Hampshire. In fact, it's some of the highest density in the country. But that being said, that really spurred me to read as many books as I could about hunting, to get really into hunting, and to do everything I could to become a more successful hunter, because I was determined that there was no way Caleb Viano was going to go back into the woods without coming out with deer. And the next year, on opening day, youth weekend, my brother drove a doe to me, and I shot her and made a perfect shot, and she collapsed there, and I had harvested my first deer. Now, I also realized that was kind of anticlimactic, and that I still wanted to go hunting. In fact, the whole point of me going hunting wasn't killing the deer. It was the adventure. It was the time spent with friends and family. It was the ability to learn something new, to watch these animals, to understand their behaviors, all the things that I'd read about. I felt like, well, shit, I still want to implement this stuff. How do I do it? So I started bow hunting. I bought a bow from a friend in school for super cheap. I don't even remember how little it was, but I didn't have much money, and that's what I did. And my dad did an archery hunt. I might have had a couple older members that were, into it, but not enough to really lead me too much. So I just read books. Again, I've always been that kind of way where, unlike most men, in that I have a hard time asking for help, but sometimes people push it upon me, which is awesome. And I'm learning to ask for it more often, but I've always just taught myself a lot of things. And so I read a lot of books, learned from some of the very best in the ways of archery. And the beautiful thing about archery was that regardless if anyone else wanted to go hunting with me, I could get it, beg, borrow, and steal to get a ride to the woods, where I could just spend my day scouting, setting up tree stands, and then during hunting season, just get dropped off and sit in a tree stand and listen and learn all day. I feel so fortunate that we didn't have the internet as kids to corrupt our minds. We didn't have phones to occupy our time. I sat in a tree stand many days from sun up till sunset, doing nothing but listening to the squirrels scuttle for around, to hoping that a deer came by. And then when it didn't, learning what I'd done wrong and tried to adapt to understand them better. That some of the most rewarding parts of archery hunting that I think a lot of people can relate to is shooting the deer's neat. But the coolest part is putting yourself in the position to see deer that close and know that you outwitted them to the point that they don't even know you're there. And to watch them behave in that environment was really something special. Because mind you, I grew up rifle hunting very different than you all do in the West. Our rifle hunting was still hunting, as we called it. We walked in the woods like Elmer Fudd. And when we jumped things up, we shot them running. We also pushed a lot of deer. That was, not in the sense of some places where there's a big crew of people and a lot of sitters. We had very small parcels of land, and the young kids, the ones that were capable of crawling on their hands and knees through the thickets, we bird dogged. We pushed deer out to the older guys that would then reap the rewards and kill these great bucks that otherwise you would not see, because the whitetail of the Northeast are extremely intelligent animals. They primarily all become nocturnal after they reach their prime. And so you don't kill big bucks sitting in a tree stand, except for maybe a few days out of the year when they're confused by the smell of estrus on a doe. They primarily sleep all day. And sometimes you'll walk up on them and they will continue to sleep to the point where you could poke them in their sleep, because they know that's their safest move, is not moving at all. So yeah, I learned a lot from all that experience, right? I had a lot of different experiences when it came to hunting, but it started to really form a pretty well-rounded education of my, I guess what I'm going with this is that I consider myself a steward of the animals and a student of them, and that was something that hunting gave me that fishing gave me in some ways. I think that tying flies and matching the hatch and all that was interesting, but fish are dumb, let's be honest, especially trout, especially bass, freshwater fish in general. They're not that hard to figure out. The hunting was something very different. I think a lot of people in New Hampshire don't even see deer their entire lives because they don't go out at night with a spotlight. And these deer are primarily nocturnal. And so it took a lot of effort to understand them. So without harping on that too much, I think that gives a lot more the foundation of why and how, as much as Lonesome Dove, Montana was the place to be. I also really just loved the outdoors, and the West looked like to me this giant playground that I could go have at my disposal, and I could enjoy nature and have all these animals and things to chase. So yeah, when I finally did graduate, I had accepted, or Montana State had accepted me as a student. I went there with the idea that I wanted to be a wildlife biologist. I actually kind of had this crazy idea that I was going to minor in entomology and that I was going to get this job working as a fisheries biologist for private ranches, so that way I could help rebuild, restore, recreate the most idyllic form of a trout stream. Growing up in New Hampshire, again, I was really enamored by trout because we didn't have very many of them. I think it's one of those things, the grass is always greener. Looking back now, I realize that I was so fortunate to have grown up on the seacoast and to have seen some of the most amazing striped bass runs, of the century. And, all the experiences I had there were amazing, but I was always enamored with, these things that I didn't really have. And so I went to Montana State, started into that degree, had a class where folks holding that degree came in and basically shared their life experiences, which my young ears heard as, you don't make any money. I love my job, but I'm not really stoked to be where I'm at. And I thought, oh man, I worked really hard for money. I'm going to have to pay for some of this. As much as my mom is helping me out here, I don't have a completely free ride to college. I better make sure that I do something that's a good investment. Better make sure that it can make me some money. And this sounds like this isn't that. So yeah, I was working at a fly shop, trying to work my way into guiding fishing. And I was going to school at a university that had a really strong engineering program. And being a math guy, again, I was kind of nerdy as a kid. I was on math team, used to travel around with my school and compete against math, talk about a nerdy thing, but I was good at it. And so I was like, oh, engineering is the way for me. I'm going to do that. That's going to be the wise thing the old men would have told me to do when all of them were telling me, don't be a fishing guide, you fool. You're not going to make any money. This is a waste of your time. And so I tried to lean into that. At the same time, I had a lot of other stuff going on in my life. Without diving into those rabbit holes, I started living in a very different way. I started giving myself a little grace when it came to following the rules, if you will. I started hanging around some younger people because of that. That was really when I started acquiring friends of a similar age, seeing more eye to eye with my peers, spending more time having fun than working. While maybe the direction I took in university wasn't the right path, I did learn some of those valuable lessons everyone talks about, that there's a lot more to university than a degree. And I appreciated that. It really helped open my eyes to the world, helped put my soul to rest in some ways that I had been very anxious about. I learned, a lot of different things along the way, and I started doing a lot of different jobs. As I was very interested in the engineering, it really started playing back into that craftsman side of me. So I began working as a fabricator at the time, doing a lot of welding and design work. I got to build four-wheel drive rock crawlers and desert race trucks and some hot rod stuff, and really started diving into this realm where I was just infatuated by it. It was awesome. I also started seeing that things were lining up really quickly for me. And if I wasn't careful, I was going to miss the opportunity of being a youth. And so I think it was like my sophomore, junior year in college, I had, again, opened my mind up in some ways. Let's just say I got back from Burning Man with my friends and I thought, man, it's time for me to go see the world. I've always wanted to travel, and if I don't do it now, I'm going to end up with a mortgage and kids and a family, and I'm going to sound like every other old fart that I didn't respect growing up that said all these things happened to me and I wasn't in control. And so I decided that it was time for me to take control and sacrifice some of the wonderful foundation that I had going in order to experience the world before I wasn't able to. And it's the best thing I ever did.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that a lot of folks get so wrapped into is we get this mindset where you're like, you got to go to university. Now your next step is a mortgage. Now your next step is kids. And we get lost. We lose our youth. And that's, it ties back into kind of like growing up around this place where you really get to enjoy your youth. And all of a sudden it's gone quickly. And for me, I joined the Army right out of high school, and I missed out on what was really important to me, and I'm learning it now in my 40s. Of like, I'm starting to hunt in my 40s, and I'm like, this is crazy that I missed out on so much of this. But it is we get these blinders on, and it's so cool that you had the whereabouts to kind of like catch that, and like you said, catching yourself before everything, as it's all lining up to be that. This is the plan. You found that. And so choosing, where was the first place you chose to travel to when you hit that realization?
Well, I actually decided that I couldn't choose any one place. And I had learned about this thing that I don't know if it still exists today, but at the time I had learned about a round the world plane ticket. And it meant that basically I had 1 year to leave the US and continue traveling around the world in one direction at my own pace. You bought the ticket based on how many stops you made, but you could fly anywhere you wanted, so long as you kept moving in either an eastward or a westward direction. So to be honest with you, I didn't really know where I wanted to go. I made a list. I had a bunch of friends that I had leaned on that had done things, I guess some of this spurred too. If I had a friend in college that lived across the hall from me in the dorms freshman year who had a similar calling and was in a similar financial place. I think I had used the excuse of money, like lots of us poor kids did when we said, I wished I could do something. And while my mother had instilled upon me at a very young age, I could do whatever I wanted, I also had the wisdom of my father that said, don't go broke doing it. So yeah, he came back from his travels to New Zealand, and, I was just enamored. I loved this magical little island, of hobbits over there. And I wanted to go too. And I remember saying to him, man, I wished I could do this. And I think that might have been one of the last times I ever said I wished I could do this, because he told me something very important that I needed to hear, that you are a worker, man. You're a doer. You're going to make this happen. I thought the same thing until I went and I used school as my crutch. He had gone over there on a study abroad thing, but then quickly dropped out of that and just studied abroad properly. And he did that by working on farms. And so I remember thinking, wow, isn't that powerful? And, maybe I ate one too many mushrooms at the time, but I thought, I can do this. Yes, sir. I'm going to sell off all of my things, and I'm going to get a job at a farm in New Zealand. And so, yeah, I actually stopped in Fiji first. That was an interesting lesson in and of itself that we could tell another time. But yeah, most of my year, I spent about 6 months in New Zealand to begin with. And yeah, loved the country, had an absolute amazing time there. Then I went to Southeast Asia for a while. Didn't do the typical tourist Southeast Asia thing. I'm always, quick to catch people there, because I think that a lot of Americans go see Southeast Asia, but they don't have a clue what Southeast Asia is. I passed out on a guy's porch after hiking over a mountain with heat stroke, and they took me in. They didn't speak any English, but I learned to speak a bunch of Thai while I lived with them, and I became a part of their family. And so I got a very different experience over there. Honestly, it was the place I had never intended to go. But yeah, again, without going down that rabbit hole today, I just let God lead the way, I guess. It's really what it came down to. And I knew I had that within me, even though I didn't always at the time call him God. I listened to intuition, and I kind of had a rule that I followed my gut, and I followed my instincts. And I still do that to this day. I just don't take so much credit for it anymore. But yeah, I did that. I did a year abroad. I quit my amazing job that I had worked so hard to get. I dropped out of school. And when I came back, I decided, Caleb, you were born to be an entrepreneur. I guess flashback a little bit to my childhood. I started my first business at 14 years old, tying flies. I actually traveled to all the New England fly shops, and I got them all to be on my accounts. I tied flies for a number of them. I got fly orders from as far away as Scotland as a child, which was amazing, because I don't even know how they found me. But I what's the right word here? Interned isn't it, but for lack of better words is what we use. I approached the first gentleman in Maine who ever built a bamboo fly rod to take me under his wing when I was in high school, and to give me some proper instruction on constructing a bamboo fly rod. Now, it's a good point to point out a lesson for maybe those that are listening that would appreciate the lessons that I've learned along the way. Regret is something I have learned is not from not doing. It's not from doing something. It comes from not doing something. Mm-hmm. And, that was one of my earliest regrets that I still have to this day, is I didn't finish that internship. I got halfway through the bamboo rod, and my young, adventurous self went on to other things, and I missed that opportunity to complete something. I did that quite a bit, honestly, growing up. I really was so enamored with doing all these things and felt like life was so short. I lost so many friends and family near and dear to me at really young ages that, that was the biggest blessing, especially like my best friend there and family members throughout my childhood. I learned that tomorrow is something that you can't plan for, that don't take today for granted, and make the most of every moment. And while there was really a lot of good in that message, I also skipped ahead a little bit too fast. I was too eager to make sure that I didn't miss out on today, because I don't know if I'm going to have tomorrow. And so, just a little tidbits there for some people in case they want to have a little bit of the wisdom that these old men have given me. Don't be afraid to do things, but also don't be afraid to enjoy what's right in front of you. So, I traveled. I got back after a year and just started my own business, my second business at this time, which was I was going to do more motorcycles. Growing up around that old biker culture, I was always enamored. I bought my first Harley Davidson at 16. Like any young men, especially us that struggle with our fathers, we still idolize them in many ways. And my dad had amazing old Harley Davidsons, and he built them himself. My dad was a little more of a restorative type in that he appreciated what Harley Davidson engineers had done. And of course, I was a young kid that thought I know best. So I liked to make them. And so, it was neat things about both, learn lessons, that's for sure. But part of it for me was my artist outlet. I drew a lot as a kid, started drawing bikes, started, fabricating them. Now I had all these tools for my fabrication job that I could work with metal, like I had learned to work with wood and feathers, if you will, with the fly tying stuff. But it was my creative outlet. I guess to flashback a little bit there again to my childhood, I had a very interesting, I don't know if mentor is the right word, probably more of an idol in a gentleman named Indian Larry. He was a motorcycle builder out of New York City that was really revolutionary for his time. Built some amazing custom bikes. But I remember the most important bit of my crossing paths with him, his bike broke down and my dad invited him to our house. He ended up fixing his bike with the help of my dad because he was an artist and very useful in the ways of motorcycle. But my dad, this uneducated, quote unquote, construction guy from New Hampshire, still knew a lot about bikes and had some really cool parts and had brothers and family and was tied into this community in a way that Larry really appreciated. And so he ended up staying with us, fixing his bike and then coming back for years. And I guess the point of that is that I learned that I could do this. There's a guy that builds motorcycles and is an artist and actually makes a living and has, done well for himself. That I don't necessarily just have to pound nails or do something that uses his degree, but I can do whatever I want. And so I kept relearning that lesson. And I decided when I came back that I loved fabrication. I still wanted to go back to school. But I was ready to start my own business again, creating. That's really the bottom line. And that meant working on old Harley Davidsons for the most part. My freshman year in college, I had actually disassembled my Harley and been building it into a chopper in my dorm room after my roommate had decided that he was going to go ride his bicycle around Europe instead of go to school. And so I remember I snuck in all these parts, right? Like I had to put a motor, I took it all apart in my storage unit. And then I snuck all these parts into my dorm room, like under the cover of boxes, on dollies, made it look like I was moving things in and out when really I was moving them mechanic shop into my dorm room. Yeah. Luckily, I was in the all male dorm again. One of those lessons you learn the hard way. I was thinking, I don't want to be surrounded by women. I got to focus on school, so I'm going to be in the all male dorm. Turns out I didn't really make very many friends, although the ones I did make were really lasting. A lot of those dudes were not exactly the same kind of dude I was. So I had my own little private entrance by my room. There were some perks to the whole thing. Yeah. But yeah, I snuck all these parts in. I got the bike nearly assembled before I took off for the year. And then I remember I finally got checked on by an RA and he was like, "Oh my God, what are you doing in here? You can't build a motorcycle in here." And of course he had a bunch of stupid reasons like there's oil and, it's flammable. And I was like, "You're full of shit. You don't know anything. Like, it's totally fine. Don't worry about it." But yeah, I got kind of booted out of there. And so I was eager to start back into that when I got back and build some bikes for other people and make a business out of it and to continue my entrepreneurial mind, because it's something that, younger Caleb used to think that there are two kinds of people on this world. Those of us who work for other people and those of us who work for ourselves. Now, I have learned that that is not indeed the case, that I think that it's a lot about who you work for. And I have been very blessed to have learned from some amazing employers, some very valuable lessons about not only how to be a good employer, but also how to work well with others, which is something that my grade school teachers would say that while I was quite good at school, I was terrible at that. So yeah, I'm working on it. That's life. None of us are perfect and we're all trying to grow. But I started this business building bikes, really attended to detail. Didn't do a lot of motorcycles, but really tried to create something that I was proud of. Sometimes I let pride get in my way, but I think that that's the important distinction there that I've learned, is that there's nothing wrong with being proud. There's something wrong with pride. And so, I built bikes that I was proud of. And I really tried to make my customers happy. I did some really amazing things with motorcycles, all old Harley Davidsons, mind you, because that's what I grew up around and that's what I had respect for. But they were functional pieces of art. That's something that really was not common. It still isn't common. My dad built bikes, and these old bikes, not because he liked going to the local bike show, but my dad and his brothers took their motorcycles from New Hampshire to California and every place in between every year on their old motorcycles. And they believed in keeping tradition alive, and that old motorcycles were meant to be ridden, not to be looked at on a showroom floor. And so, yeah, I wanted to do that. I wanted to keep old things alive. And it's funny that ties into my outfitting perspective in a lot of ways. But yeah, I started building bikes, did that for a number of years, ended up dropping out of college because I was trying to freak out the squares again. I thought, just like I'd gotten tattoos as a kid and people told me you're never going to be a success with tattoos. I also thought, well, I don't like the idea that I'm following these rules and that I'm going to get this degree people told me I needed to get. So I'm going to fight back against the man, and I'm going to drop out right when I've nearly hit the finish line. Yeah, not a smart move. Don't do that.
For my younger folks that are listening to this, the term "freaking out the squares" is a reference to getting outside the social box, if you will, of white collar, clean cut, properly dressed, always looking to the nines, and freaking them out would be tattoos at an early age, and riding a motorcycle and building motorcycles, and being outside of that norm is against the normal societal grain,
100%.
which at the time, and especially on the East Coast, I think the West Coast had it a little bit easier in that time frame. Is we were really experiencing punk rock at a high level, and we were still coming out of the '80s hair phase, so there was this kind of rebellious sense out here that we didn't get a picture of on the East Coast, which was even bigger than it was here. And again,
a lot of suits and ties, a lot of really, your grandfather set this up for you. Now you will do it, and your children will do it, and this is your life has been decided. So yeah, you did a really good job of saying that, Andrew. That's so true. It's something that people don't understand unless they've been to the Northeast, and I don't think it's a bad thing in any way. I love our history. That's something that has always resonated with me, is that we grew up in houses that were the founders of this country, right? Like, we have heritage in the foundation, and it's important to be involved in your country and to understand its foundation. But yeah, also at the same time, don't be afraid to think outside the box. I think that's how I really thought about it in a lot of ways. Is sometimes it was scare society straight, but it was also just don't be afraid to be creative and be you. And so yeah, that's really where that went. Mind you, when I started this business, I dropped out of college. I also, when I returned from this year abroad, I purchased a puppy. His name was Chopper. He was a German short-hair pointer, and he was extremely talented. I mean, I knew from the get-go that dog was something special, and it's no coincidence he came into my life when he did. It was the grounding that I needed when my soul just wanted to be, a saddle tramp, when I had this everlasting wanderlust, and I knew that there was something more important to life than just that. I felt like that was a little bit too self-serving, and I needed to and I needed to have a little bit of grounding in my life. Something that made me stick with something a little bit. And so when I bought Chopper, it was a total it was meant to be. I found him on an ad. I'd already picked out that I wanted this. I knew that I wanted this dog. I don't know why, but I decided it to be so. And I was walking out of a Sportsman's Warehouse, and there was a little posted stuck to the, back when people actually used to do that with like a pin board. There was this note up there that said, like, last of the litter, German short hair pointer puppies, 2 of them, half price, $500. Right. And at the time, I didn't have any money. Right. Like, I was like, I really want this dog. But at the time, I also wanted like the best dog, because that's just the way I've always been, that I want the best of whatever it's going to be. And I was like, I'm going to have this thing for 20 years. I better not buy some shit heel. I better, have a real quality breeding. And as it turned out, Chopper was actually of some of the most prestigious breeding. His parents were on the cover of bird dog magazines, and it showed. That dog, I don't know why. I do know why. He was made for me. I don't know how I got that dog. When I did, my life changed that day. Like his ability was unreal. I had him nearly finished at 3 months old. I had him pointing, retrieving, the whole works. Like he could do it all, and he was so phenomenal. Mind you, I was a crummy bird hunter. Okay, I had like bird hunted a little bit as a kid, but I liked deer hunting because birds didn't fill the freezer like a whitetail did. I had a friend in high school that was the opposite, and he looked at it like, yeah, but you guys tag out and I get to go hunting every day, so I'm going to hunt birds. I get to shoot my gun a lot. You get to shoot it once a year. That's boring. And it's funny, all these things, right? And they come out, and the more I say them now, the more it really comes out of my memory. But yeah, I don't know what it was, but I had, God guiding my hand. I killed like the first 10 grouse I ever pointed a shotgun at after never hitting one ever as a kid. And it just cemented that dog's learning. I traveled to Idaho because I had a childhood friend whose father had purchased an outfitting business there. And a part of that was he leased about 10,000 acres of private land that, unbeknownst to me at the time, but kind of encouraged, was that we have all these birds, you should come shoot some. And I was looking for great bird hunting. I had naturally gone grouse hunting a bunch in Montana because that's what we knew there to be in New Hampshire. And it turns out that the grouse hunting of Montana is amazing and very different than walking an old granite stone wall through an oak forest of New Hampshire. But it was kind of, I wanted to try something new. I wanted to keep showing the dog that he was really good. And so I went there, I hunted these ranches. We shot Hungarian partridge, California quail, and most importantly, chukar on these ranches. And I fast tracked that dog. I mean, part of it was him, but part of it was also the fact that he got to see so many birds and watch them get shot over him and get the praise that every dog needs. I had dogs as a kid. I really loved dogs. I had some interesting dogs. I grew up with primarily a beagle and from my mom's house, and my dad had a German Shepherd. Okay. And so like I had been to puppy training classes and, I learned a lot about how to interact with animals because I loved them. But I had always, been enamored by horses and mules and these things, and never really had much of a chance. Been around them a little bit, but back east, people that know horses they handle very different. It's a lot more English. It's a lot more show. It's not utilitarian. And so I liked utilitarian things. I liked working with the dog. And that's one of the reasons why I got the bird dog, is this was my opportunity to work with a dog. I grew up around houndsmen in New Hampshire that ran bears. And so I understand that working relationship in a way that really inspired me in ways I didn't really even know, but I just, again, follow that intuition where I ended up with this bird dog and now I need to become a bird hunter. And when I became a bird hunter, I realized, holy shit, do I have an amazing bird dog. It's not just a bird dog, but he is like 1 in 10 million bird dogs. And it would be a complete disservice to him if I don't give him the career he deserves. And so, yeah, I started wearing these different hats. I decided that I was going to run my motorcycle shop, which was great. But I was going to drop out of college because now I was also going to go guide hunting. I decided that I was going to go start that by working with this outfitter, my friend's father, who had this private ground that he was underutilizing. He did deer and elk hunts on it, but he didn't do any upland hunts because he didn't have someone like Chopper or me. And so I went there and kind of helped stand that program up. It was wildly successful. I was definitely underpaid, which was another good lesson of know your worth. But at the same time, I didn't need money. I had enough to survive, and I don't fault the guy for that. He just was a shrewd businessman, and so I again learned a bunch of lessons from a shrewd businessman, which were helpful in life. But yeah, I gave Chopper the opportunity he deserved, and he steered the path for a ways. He showed me that was what was most important. That I really had kind of stopped hunting for a bit in college. I was a bit, distracted. It's the best word. But I started to remember how much I loved hunting again. When I got Chopper, it forced me in Montana to move out of my friend's house and get my own place. That combined with maybe a little bit of a girl thing that I thought I needed. But anyways, I ended up with this amazing
distractions.
Yeah, distractions.
Distractions.
I got this property on this river where we had deer and stuff in our yard. More importantly, I had room for Chopper to run around and to be a dog. There was a river where I taught him how to swim in. It was beautiful. And so I set up in the shop there with my motorcycle stuff. And that was my first location where I started that business. But I could also come and go. And now, because I'm no longer a student, and so I started guiding birds seasonally in Idaho. Very quickly into that, I realized that while I loved this opportunity to hunt birds, I was also surrounded by these super cool guides that did elk and deer, and more importantly, horses and mules, this thing that I had really set to the west to find. Back to those Lonesome Dove days, like that was something I was like, man, I need to be a cowboy. I've always wanted to be a cowboy. I mean, I've been looking through his old photo albums of me as a kid where I used to dress up like a cowboy. My dad in love with old Westerns, as was all his brothers. And so, it was my calling. And so I started doing that too. And yeah, that was interesting, right? Learned a lot of lessons there. It was probably a good thing for a whole nother podcast as far as lessons I learned in the ways of horsemanship and what really led me to where I am today. But the gist of it was that I got to learn from a lot of different people that came from a lot of different backgrounds in a lot of different settings. And the nature of Caleb is that I like that. I like to discern. I like to be really attentive to detail. I like to, that engineering side of me was there is a right way to do something, or there is a more efficient way to do something. And you should always strive for that. I think that, again, back to those lessons my dad taught me, was like, it's important to do this, to be efficient with your time, to make every moment count, and to do something that you are proud of. I think that sometimes I misword that, but a phrase that always comes to mind is take pride in your work. And so, yeah, I started doing that. I started learning how to work with horses and mules, started guiding elk and deer, in addition to the bird hunting, of course. I bounced back and forth from Montana to Idaho between working on motorcycles and doing that for the first season. And then the second season, I was encouraged to go back to school in some way because my mom was kind of disappointed that I didn't finish college. And I had a friend that was a flight instructor. My mom started asking me, like, if you could do anything, what would it be? And at the time, I don't know, part of me was like, I want to be a pilot. My grandfather was a pilot in the Air Force. And so I don't know if that was it so much as just like being in the West and seeing, like, I saw it as the ultimate ATV. I saw it as this sense of freedom. And, I think like all human beings, the idea of flight is just mind blowing.
We take it for granted.
It's just this wild thing, right? And as much as I say that I'm born 100 years too late, I am so fortunate to have been born in this age where just lowly old Caleb here from New Hampshire can not only be a cowboy, but he can also travel the world, and he can also be a pilot. And so I had a friend that was a flight instructor, and I took whatever they call it, a discovery flight with him. And I struggled with a lot of back stuff my whole childhood without going into that. The gist of it was this plane that I was in really hurt my back. And I was like, man, I love this thing. I really want to fly, but I definitely can't hang out in this vessel for very long because it hurts. And so I remember as we were landing or making my first landing, actually probably my only landing fully at the stick here, of an airplane, that is, we passed by this helicopter hangar. And I was like, isn't that way cooler than this? Those war birds are rad, right? I used to love war stuff without, again, divulging into there. I came from a long line of military background. I was, enamored with that. I actually was a junior CB in high school. I was on a path to become an officer. And then through my tattoos and poor choices at 17, I kind of got disqualified from that, which is fine. Honestly, everything happens for a reason. But I was always like, if I could do anything in the military, I would love to, like, I really want to be a warrant officer. I really want to fly helicopters. And that was, again, just like one of those brain farts you have, but like it was in there somewhere. I just had to dig it out. But yeah, so anyways, I stopped kind of flying the planes, or I went on a couple flights, but just wasn't for me in the regard of that plane I could afford. I could spend more to be in a bigger airplane like a Cessna that was much more comfortable with flying. But again, I didn't have the money for any of this stuff. I was just kind of doing it because I had a friend that offered it to me. So yeah, my mom goes to asking me, what would you do if you could go back to school? And I was like, I really want to fly helicopters. And I think for her, she was like, what? Where did you come up with this crackpot idea? Like, what is on? Like, I don't. But at the same time, my mom's always like, all right, well, then how do you do it? Make it happen. If that's what you want, make it happen. And I was like, oh, well, I just put my foot in my mouth. Like, I don't know how I'm going to make this happen. Like, I got all this. I'm building bikes and I'm guiding hunts and I got chopper and yeah, man, like, how am I going to do this? And she was like, well, do the first step. Go meet with the helicopter hangar. Go talk to the owner. See what it takes to become a pilot. I'm going to fly out there and we're going to go do it together. That way you can, like, you're actually going to do it, right? And God bless her soul. My mom is just the most amazing person in my life. She's always believed in me. And I didn't get that from my father. Unfortunately, that was probably one of the hardest lessons that I had to learn growing up, was that not everyone believes in you. But my mother always did. And yeah, she brought me there. We went, we interviewed. They definitely sold me a pipe dream, and as they should, right? I mean, that's kind of every pilot's thing, as it turns out. Like, first step in being a pilot is that you need to be an instructor, which means you need to sell this career to other people in order for them to further your career. So, I just ate it up. I thought, man, I'm going to get in debt over this. My mom's going to help me out, but I'm going to figure out a way to make this happen. And, I'm going to make a bunch of money, right? It was back to that whole thing of like being an engineer. I was like, oh, and this is my freedom, right? Because I know that money equals freedom. Again, still had some lessons to learn. So I started flying. Like anything I do, I like to immerse myself. I really like to dive in head first and just drink all the seawater. So I started flying like 5 days a week, studying. I really fast tracked through a lot of it. Within a couple of years, I had nearly all of my ratings as a helicopter pilot. Loved it, man. I had some amazing job opportunities presented to me by some of the most amazing people in the industry, but I was still struggling. This balance thing of all these different careers. I was feeling like I don't know what to do. I want to do it all. And I'm trying to do it all, and therefore I'm not doing any of it great. And it's time for me to decide and be an adult and focus on one thing. I think the old saying is a jack of all trades, right? And I'd always wanted to be that, but the full saying, I believe, is something more like a jack of all trades, but a master of none. But sometimes that's better than a master of one. And I think that it's an important little quote there. I think it's not surprising that we cut it shy in society, and people think of the first half as being a little bit more harsh than the reality of it. I appreciated my father's guidance there, and that he was good at doing everything, and he wasn't great at doing anything, but he was good at doing almost everything that a man needed to know how to do, whether it was changing your oil or fix the windows in your house or drive in a snowstorm or shake someone's hand firmly while looking them in the eye. That your word was worth everything, and that if you weren't good for your word, you weren't good for much. There was all these lessons that I had learned along the way, and I thought that it was time to start focusing more. I had never done anything career-wise for more than about 5 years at that time. That was kind of the limit that I kept reaching before I felt like it was time to jump overboard and swim to the next island and see what else I could rape and pillage. It was time to go on, because if I kept on this one path, I was going to miss out on the rest of life. And so I don't know really what it was. I think it was a little bit of fear of completion. Again, I was right at that point where I needed to finish the rest of my ratings. I had done all the hours. I had passed all the tests with flying colors, but I needed some check rides. And I had a little hiccup where the examiner was retiring and I couldn't get a check ride. And I needed a couple of check rides to finish up like my CFII and CFI ratings. And I'd gone through commercial ratings at that point, instrument stuff. But anyways, most people don't know what that means. Doesn't matter. The point was, I quit on something a little bit too soon again. And it's a regret that I have. I didn't complete it. I had some amazing experience. I had some amazing job opportunities. I think I probably would have taken one of them. I was friends with a representative for a major aircraft company, Bell. Textron is the company, and I got offered a job that's normally handed down to the guy's children, but his children were too young, and so he offered me the position. And long story short, I wasn't eligible for the position because I had not gotten my college degree. And so again, I kind of was a little bit, it lit that fire again of, well, if you tell me I can't do something, the hell with you, I'm going to do something else. So I decided that I was going to pursue more of my guiding career. Now, at that same time, I'd also started working in Alaska as a guide because I had always wanted to go to Alaska. Always just been enamored by how amazing the North was. I really wanted to guide Dall sheep. Was mainly the reason I went up there. And I had an in with a friend of the guy I was working for in Idaho. So I did that. And I spent the first season up there. I did 104 days in the field, basically without coming out much at all. I think I might have come out for like a night in order to get flown into another camp. But I was, doing everything and implementing all these different skills, right? We logged trees, which I hadn't really known how to run a chainsaw that great. I cleared trail, but now I was climbing and falling trees, skidding them with a dozer back to a woodimizer, milling logs into lumber, and then building cabins. And that was just what we did in our free time that we didn't get paid for. The rest of the time I was running bear baits and helping that outfitter understand something that I was quite good at that time, which was baiting bears. And so did that. And then he showed me how to hunt the mountains of Alaska, which were very different than Montana or New Hampshire. I was getting this amazing education. And I remember having the thought, okay, I got to pick one of these careers. Which one can I only do now? Which one will I not be able to do when I'm older? And I thought, I better guide full time. That's really something I want to do because I can fly when my bones are broken. I can build motorcycles when I can no longer, get around the house. Like I can do all those things later in life, but I certainly can't carry 150 pounds in my back and traverse mountains like a kid unless I am a kid. So that was kind of it. The guy I was working for in Idaho, ran a really big outfit, and without diving in there too hard, the long story short was that we had a handshake deal that I was going to take over and purchase his business from him, and I was going to make that my career. I started making good on that commitment by purchasing his home when I returned from Alaska. I purchased my ranch in Pollock, Idaho, which is just outside of Riggins. Most people don't know where either of those places are. Riggins is the whitewater capital of Idaho, but more importantly, I guess for those West Coasters that have now discovered this wonderful state of Idaho, it's just north of McCall. I had discovered in Montana that Idaho was where Montanans went to vacation. And so it was hard for me to leave Montana, but I was struggling to buy a home. I felt like I kept missing the 8 ball. I didn't know what to do, but I knew it was time to quit pissing away my money in rent. And I needed to get something, invest in myself. And here was this opportunity. I could buy a ranch for within my budget, which was way more than I was going to get in the college town of Bozeman. And so I did it. I bought this place. Now I needed a lot of fixing up. I saw the vision though. And I chased the dream. So I walked away from the helicopter stuff, which was really hard to do. My motorcycle stuff, honestly, was not that hard to walk away from because I didn't really walk away from it. I shut down my business, but I didn't sell it. I kept all my tools. I kept all my bikes. I just moved them into my giant new shop at my house in Idaho and took a break, which honestly was needed because I was starting to get pretty burnt out. I really loved working on old motorcycles, but most of the people that wanted to buy them were not of the same mindset as me and that they wanted to use them. They just wanted to look at them. And so I was very frustrated with that whole thing. I didn't want to do oil changes on new bikes. I didn't want to do the things that I knew it was going to take to make that a successful business. I kind of just plateaued. I also didn't have any employees. I think that's an important thing to note. I had successfully started and stopped 2 businesses now without any employees. I tried with the motorcycle shop, but I just floundered. Nobody had the passion for the old bikes. Nobody really wanted to learn. They wanted to be around motorcycles, but they didn't want to take pride in learning what was important to know about them in order to do them well. And to be honest, I had a lot of faults as an employer. I didn't want to pay people enough. I was too frugal, and there was a lot of lessons to be learned there. But as part of this whole deal, I had made up my mind that I was moving to Idaho and I was going to start a family and I was going to become an outfitter. So I was just racing to collect all my pieces of my puzzle again. I met this gal in McCall and decided, well, there we go. Got that piece of my puzzle, and I swooped her up and said, "You're coming with me. We're going to go make babies and have a family and be Americans." And that was a bit of a mistake. I guess I shouldn't phrase it that way. It wasn't a mistake, but it was another lesson that God was like, haha, right when you make a plan, let me laugh. I did that. I moved into this house. I got married, and part of that process meant, well, now I need a career because I'm looking to have kids. It's time for me to be serious about life. I was freelance guiding at that point in time for about 4 years. And so I was like, I was kind of over working for somebody else again, right? There's that reminder that I'd had of like, you don't work for other people, you work for yourself. And I kicked myself in the pants and said, it's time to do this thing. And right about when I decided I was going to buy this guy out, he kind of gave me the shaft, decided that he wanted twice as much as we'd shaken on. And the whole deal crumbled to pieces, which was the blessing. Honestly, it was. I'm so fortunate. All these things that I thought in the moment sucked were some of the best things that ever happened to me. And that's can be said for so much of life. I think people get so hung up on this stuff. Something that I've learned recently, or heard, said recently, but I thought was really, really valuable was suffering is paying too much attention to oneself. We all have this tendency to. Tony Robbins said that, and I love Tony. He's just a great guy. He's got some amazing wisdom to share. I hope to meet him someday. But I've certainly got a lot of guidance from him. Again, my mom's so clever. She's been to a number of his retreats and inspired me with his stuff at an early age. But I think that's so true. It's so easy to get caught up in things that didn't happen or plans that we had made that had fallen apart. And I didn't really know what that meant until my marriage fell apart. I was with my ex-wife for about 7 years, 6 or 7 years in total, engaged for a couple, married for about 5. It was just a struggle the whole time, and I knew it all along. I knew that it wasn't the right thing to do, but I was learning lessons I needed to learn. I needed to learn that I could love someone unconditionally. That was something that I didn't think I was worthy of, to be honest with you at the time. I didn't know why I could do this. I didn't know why I could let her drag me through the pits that we did. I didn't know anything. I guess this was the start of me understanding. I didn't know anything, but I was just trying to do my best, trying to live by the virtues that I had been taught as a kid in church, trying to, do right by the way that I had learned the things not to do as a kid. My dad, again, he's an amazing individual, but he didn't treat women the way he should have. And I appreciated my mom a lot more than he ever could have. And so I thought that, marriage meant commitment. I mean, I know that's true. It's because it's not, it's not my word, but it's my commitment to God. And it's a sacrament it's so holy that you can't ignore it. If you have any sense of morality in this world, there's so much more to marriage than a ring on your finger and the vows you said. I use that as an excuse, and I misspoke to my ex-wife many a times, and I think that confused her because I didn't know how to put that in words. But yeah, I floundered to the point where she needed to make decisions for me that I should have made years prior. And the long story short was I started this business, Wilderness Mule, in the early stages of I bought the area right before we actually got married. And I also decided that, again, my old school ignorance was like, I want a mother of my children, so you don't need to work anymore. And I'm going to hold all the responsibility in my own hands here. And so, yeah, I started this company, Wilderness Mule. I poured everything into it and stopped pouring as much into my relationship as I should have. I really focused on things that were giving me wins. And, when she started to resent me for that, it kind of just, multiplied. I focused on work because it was the only thing I was getting wins from, and I was no longer getting wins from my relationship. And so the resentment grew. And yeah, our relationship started to fall apart. I think that, not making our commitment making our commitment to one another instead of making that commitment to God, was a really important lesson for me to learn. We started to allow Satan into our lives and to corrupt our relationship. We allowed, all this things, friends, the nonsense, all this stuff. The more I tried, the more I floundered. I feel like it's, the case of like when you're treading at sea and, the more you just flail, the faster you drown. When in reality, if you just stopped, relaxed, looked up to God and just allowed your lungs to fill up, you could float. I didn't know that, man. As much as I knew that about swimming, I didn't know that about life. I didn't know that there was more importance to giving myself to something far greater than myself, giving my life to God. And I floundered to the point that we drowned. And I ended up, losing the person that was most important to me trying to save us. And I luckily didn't lose the business because I never let that come to work. I think that's, right along the lines where I met you and you got to see that in me. And honestly, it made me a better employer, I think. Made me a better friend. I know that to be true because I started focusing on my friendships again instead of my own selfishness. I started focusing on the people around me and bringing these people up. And again, I learned a lot more lessons there along the way. But, the gist of it was I used my divorce as an opportunity to learn and grow, which is one of the wisest decisions I ever made. And once I had finally decided that, I think the hardest part about for divorce was that I have always wanted to be a father. And I'm sure that some of that stems from wanting to do a better job than my father. I hate to say that because I don't want that to come off the wrong way, but I think it's one of those things that we always want to improve. And even if it's not improve ourselves, but my dad is a great dad in many ways. I wanted to see that I could do better. And that's a terrible way, especially when I say it out loud. I feel like, that's gross. Me out there. I don't want to ever say that, but I want to be a dad. And I thought losing my marriage meant losing that opportunity. I was in my 30s and everything society tells you, all this stuff. I had struggles with my ex-wife. It was another part of the reason we fell apart was we were trying to get pregnant and everything wasn't working, which was a blessing. Thank you, God, that it didn't happen. Nothing worse than divorce in a young kid's life. I don't ever want my kids to go through that. So I finally submitted and just thought, if I'm going to have kids, I'm going to have kids, but I'm not going to make that my priority going forward. What's most important is that I learn and I grow as much as I possibly can from this. I have had too many times a woman tell me, the same things, and too many relationships end because of similar things. And the common denominator here is me. And the only thing I can change is me. And so, I've also watched my businesses reach plateaus, right? I've been about this for about 4 or 5 years. I was like, I'm not going to let this one fail. I'm going to learn and I'm going to grow and I'm going to be the best version of me I possibly can. My good friend, Casey Lutz told me, he said, build your kingdom and you will find your queen. And so I just embraced that. It was really weird going back to dating in the middle of running a business and all 200 people with nothing but a post office. But I started dating and would you imagine that? Right as soon as I stopped looking and decided that I was done dating, that I was just going to be a happy single man and just be the woodsman I always wanted to be as a kid, I met my forever person. I met my soulmate and my soon-to-be wife, Nicole. Total fluke thing. It wasn't an internet hookup. It wasn't anything. Honestly, we met each other and thought, interesting. We're not interested in each other, but you're cool. Let's talk, whatever. Let's just have a conversation. So yeah, man, it's amazing what comes along the way. But yeah, I guess to get back to life, everything started improving. Imagine that. When I started focusing on me, my relationship with everyone got better, including yourself. I feel so grateful to have you as a part of this team, and I don't ever look at it like I'm the employer and you're the employee. I look at it like I have this amazing opportunity to make someone else's dreams come true. And what greater gift could there possibly be than that? Like, what greater gift could I have as a person than to put a smile on someone else's face? I mean, that is so much about, I think I was misled in so many ways that I learn more every day when it comes to this hunting guiding thing. People think I like to kill things. People think that I like to be a hermit. People think that, I want to be a cowboy. My purpose in this planet that I really enjoy is having positive impact on people around me. And that's what drives me every day. That's what excites me. Like, my attention to detail isn't because I like to be, obsessive compulsive. It isn't because I feel like there's a right way and a wrong way. I just want to be the best version of me possible to inspire everyone around me to be the best versions of themselves. I want to do right for other people because that's what God tells us to do. I want to lead with love, and I want to share in these amazing experiences. That's the thing about what I do in Idaho that's so unreal to me, is that I have been around the world. I've seen some of the most wild places. I operate in one of the most unique environments there are. And I know that you know that. And I try to explain this to people, and I try to show them people don't get it, and they won't get it. And that's the beauty of it, is that, like, unless you commit to this thing and you come on a trip, or you plan in a way that honestly costs you way more than a trip financially and time-wise, you'll never get to see God's creation in the ways that we do. You'll never get to experience these wild places. And, we use hunting tags and a goal as our excuse to wake up early, or to, go stand on top of the mountain when it's blowing 40 mile an hour and just shitting rain or snow. We use this as an excuse to, like, do all these things that we would otherwise, no sane person would ever do. But it's not because of the animal. That's actually the last thing that's important. We do all this stuff because it brings us closer to God. It brings us closer to our friends, brings us closer to family. Like, we get to enjoy sunsets and sunrises in the most amazing church on earth in a way that people don't have any, they can't even wrap their head around it. And some people come on these trips and they still can't wrap their head around it, unfortunately. I hate when I see that happens, but it is very, very few. The majority of people, these trips are life-changing. And I've always felt so privileged to be the catalyst in someone's change of life, to be a part of their most fondest memories, to be included in their greatest adventure. And that's really, if you could sum up my life, like I always say this, I read a book years ago that I found on an old shelf in Alaska. And, the opening quote is what I hope to have on my headstone someday. Is an author by the name of John M. Holsworth. He wrote a book called The Grizzlies of Alaska. And he said, the highest duty of man is to undertake adventure. And that's my life, man. We talk about all these different things, and I've left out a lot of puzzle pieces along the way. But if you had to sum up, what does Caleb do? Caleb feels very dutiful. And it's a terrible way of putting that, actually. But yeah, my duty here is to embark an adventure and to show that to other people, to help them experience that, to break them out of their box and their confines that society has driven them to be a proud American, to embrace our culture and our heritage, to, exemplify tradition, to learn and to take pride in everything that we do. But life is one great adventure, and it's important, it's imperative that we don't let that adventure pass us by.
I absolutely love that. And you are definitely one of the men who has helped me to understand and to really drive for purpose. And I think that that's the greatest message in that last bit, is finding purpose in life and then delivering through that message and finding it. Caleb, thank you so much, man. Like, This is beyond anything I could have imagined it would be. From the depths of beginning entrepreneurship to experiencing loss to recognizing mentorship to feeling your purpose through God and knowing what your skills and your tools have been and how you pass that on to others inspires people like me. And it's undoubtedly going to inspire everybody that listens to this. It's, I think that people might see this and they might think to themselves, oh, we're going to talk about hunting and fishing. And well, no, we talked about that adventure, right? And seeking that adventure and seeking the outdoors and seeking others and sharing our passion with them. What a beautiful, beautiful conversation this has been. I'm very just honored to have had this with you.
Well, thank you. I need to tell my story more. It's something I get told all the time because I like to do it face to face with people. I don't ever want to be an icon for people, and I don't ever want to be famous. I don't ever want to come off. I want to remain humble. That's really what it comes down to. Is that is so imperative to me, is that I remain humble and remember that I do know nothing. And I don't owe it to myself. I owe it to everyone else that has brought me here. So yeah, I really can't thank you enough for allowing this to be recorded and inviting me to your podcast. It's my first podcast, and now I feel like you've lightened my day. You've like always, man. You make me a happy person, and I think that it's not a surprise, but it sure does surprise me in the moment. So thank you very much.
Heck yeah, it's my pleasure. I'm going to put the website on the show notes. This is really just life and entrepreneurship, 100% deep down. I have a plan for spring bear camp. We're going to tell hunting stories and we're going to record them because the hunting stories that we get to share. And again, like this is another thing that through your purpose, through God's word, has brought you to this purpose of like the stories that we get to share. I think are so cool. So we'll record. I got a whole plan.
Love it.
Again, my plans versus God's plans. We'll see what He has in store for us, anyways.
Yeah, we make a plan, and He'll laugh. But hey,
exactly.
We'll share in those moments with ourselves and our guests, and that's all that really matters. Is keep trying. So
exactly. Well, you go out there, be great today. Have a fantastic afternoon. Thank you again, and I will talk to you here soon.
Thank you, Andrew. So much love.
You betcha, brother.
Take care.
That's it for this episode of Here From Where. Thanks for tuning in, and if you enjoyed the conversation, be sure to subscribe and leave a review. A huge thanks to Justin Pitaleski for the music and sound production, and until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep moving forward. All the best, and happy cooking.